"She's just not feeling well," my son said, locking my granddaughter away. The coffin noises begged to differ. I opened it. Chains and tape. They plan to bury her alive for millions. Early December arrived, and the first snow flurries began, and I was out in my yard, putting the final bulbs into the ground. Gardening, even at my age, was my absolute comfort. The flashbacks from 3 decades working in the ER still sometimes disrupted my sleep. But when those dark thoughts surfaced, the smell of the earth and the vibrant energy of the plants always grounded me. My home, which had been built in the 80s, was famous around Worthington for its beautiful gardens. The tulips I was currently planting would be in full bloom come springtime. Ever since my husband Thomas passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack a decade prior, this garden had really kept me going. On weekends, neighbors often strolled by during their walks, anticipating some of my fresh-baked apple pie. I should have been living out a peaceful retirement here in this calm Columbus, Ohio, suburb. "Grandma," I heard, and looked back to see my 5-year-old granddaughter, Emily, running towards me, her little hands waving in greeting. Still, a sense of unease washed over me. Her usual lively run was absent. She seemed to be shuffling her feet somewhat as she ran. "Emily, watch out!" I quickly pulled off my gardening gloves and extended my arms, ready to hug her. Emily, complying, jumped right into my embrace, but her weight seemed much less than usual. For a child who was the result of 7 years of infertility treatments, her weight loss was really troubling. "Emily, are you eating your mother's meals a lot recently?" "Right, but Mama says I mustn't gain weight." Emily's voice was quiet, and she was clearly upset. I wanted to carefully push up my granddaughter's long-sleeved shirt, but Emily quickly pulled her arm away. The way she reacted reminded me of how abused kids acted in the emergency room so many times. "Does it hurt?" "No, I'm okay." The answer was non-committal, and Emily kept staring at the floor. Having worked as a nurse for 3 decades and handled countless abuse cases, my gut feeling was sounding the alert. My son and daughter-in-law's home was a contemporary townhouse in a new development, just a 15-minute drive. My son James, who was 38, managed a real estate company. Although he seemed kind, he was very concerned with finances. His wife, Rachel, used to be an investment advisor but now stayed at home full-time and was expecting their second child. Just last week at the Sunday meal, I'd overheard them talking about their former $1 million debt from 7 years of IVF and an additional $2 million lost in an investment scheme. "James, Emily doesn't seem right." My son hurried out to the yard. A brief look of worry appeared on his face. "Oh, she hasn't been feeling great recently. Rachel is concerned and ensuring she gets a lot of rest." My son's words sounded plausible, however, there was something phony about his tone. I looked for Rachel, my son's wife, who was 8 months pregnant. She was watching me with a detached expression from inside the house. Lately, Rachel just wasn't the same. The bright, happy spark that I was accustomed to had vanished, replaced by eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. "Emily, you need to come home." Rachel spoke with a tone that was much quieter and sharper than what I was used to. From that day forward, I found that I saw Emily less and less often. When I tried calling, I'd get answers like, "She's under the weather," or "We had to take her to the doctor." But I, due to my connections in the area, was fully aware that they hadn't visited a doctor. Every Sunday, after the service at St. Michael's Catholic Church, I went to pray by myself. My old friends from Riverside Methodist Hospital would tell me how worried they were about Emily. "God, I really hope I'm wrong about this." Each time I prayed in the church, Margaret would be consumed with worry. The dread I felt was unlike anything I had experienced since my husband passed away a decade before. Weekend shopping trips to Kroger had become a thing of the past, as Emily wasn't joining us anymore. Sadly, my gut feelings would turn out to be true. Just a day after Rachel found out she was having a boy, Emily's health went downhill rapidly. My years as a nurse told me bad news was on its way. My past as a nurse confirmed my fears of what was to come. From that moment on, Emily's health problems got worse. When I visited my son's house, Emily would be hidden behind the steps. The granddaughter, who used to rush to hug me, now acted scared like a tiny, skittish animal. In the newly built townhouse, Emily was just a ghost of her former self. "Emily, it's Grandma." "Things are okay, I guess." Even when spoken to, Emily would only offer a barely noticeable head movement. The little girl who used to dash around the yard full of energy now spent her days concealed in long sleeves, lurking in the dimness. I tried repeatedly to look for any marks on her arms, but Emily wouldn't let me, absolutely refusing. Her actions clearly conveyed her terror. While at Riverside Methodist Hospital, I'd become familiar with the typical behaviors of kids who had been abused. Covering up their arms and legs, cringing when adults were nearby, odd eating behaviors, Emily exhibited all of them. "Are you eating properly these days?" "Yes," she said, but then Emily looked around nervously before whispering like she was terrified of being heard. I eat secretly in my bedroom. Just then, Rachel's voice echoed from the kitchen. It was a harsh, emotionless voice coming from the new stainless steel counter. Emily, what are you saying? At the sound of that voice, Emily's whole body stiffened for a split second. I was reminded of my nursing days, the numerous cases of abuse I'd seen in the emergency room, children trembling at the sound of their parents' voices, and now my own granddaughter was showing the same response. 30 years of working in the field sent out every possible alarm. Rachel, could you tell me who Emily's doctor is? At my question, Rachel's eyes opened wide for a moment. Holding her 8-month pregnant belly, she showed obvious signs of being uncomfortable. Oh, yes, but the main doctor is on leave at the moment. It sounded like she was making an excuse. It appeared Rachel had overlooked the fact that Margaret was acquainted with every single pediatrician around here. Emily hadn't been checked out by any of the physicians who regularly attended Mass with her at St. Michael's Catholic Church. At the evening meal, Emily displayed some peculiar eating behaviors. She devoured her food with incredible speed, like she was afraid she wouldn't get fed again. However, it was undeniable that her body was shrinking. Her gaunt form was hidden beneath that long-sleeved dress. Mama and Papa say I should go to heaven. The words that Emily abruptly whispered after dinner sent a chill down Margaret's back. That same deep-seated dread that had overwhelmed her when her husband, Thomas, passed away was back. Emily, what exactly do you mean? But before she could say more, Rachel cut her off. There was a strange, intense look in her eyes that she'd never seen before. It's time for bed. Margaret, maybe you should head home. While leaving, I found my son in the garage. In the faint light, I looked for any remnants of the son I used to know. James, please tell me the honest truth. Mom, you're overreacting. Emily's just not feeling well right now. Her son couldn't bring himself to look his mother in the eye. The burden of a $4 million fertility treatment debt and $2 million lost in investment fraud had transformed my son into someone new. Afterwards, my chances to visit Emily became very infrequent. Phone conversations were answered with excuses like, she's asleep, or she's undergoing tests. Nonetheless, I then got in touch with my old coworkers at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital, and there were no documents indicating Emily had ever been a patient there. One afternoon, on my way back from Kroger after buying groceries, I happened to be driving past my son's house when I heard yelling coming from inside. It was an anguished cry that cut right through the pristine walls of the contemporary townhouse. I'd had enough. At this point, everything would. It was Rachel's voice I recognized. When I got near the front door, the voice stopped abruptly. My son opened the door and I noticed he was perspiring even though it was freezing outside. Mom, she's not doing well right now, he said, but I just heard screaming, I replied. Rachel's dealing with really bad morning sickness, he told me. She's been on edge throughout this pregnancy. My son's response was too pat, too smooth. Emily's sobbing could be heard from somewhere behind him. Her voice sounded like she was in extreme pain. The following day, Rachel's prenatal appointment revealed they were expecting a son. After that, my son and daughter-in-law's behavior toward me totally changed. They said Emily's health had quickly worsened, and with no confirmation from any doctor, they completely prohibited me from visiting. We discovered a serious genetic illness, they said. There's a risk of her catching something, so we can't let you see her, Mom. Because of my medical background, I thought something was off about my son's explanation. What sort of genetic condition could suddenly show up and cause an infection risk? Why would they even reveal the doctor's official diagnosis? Her 3 decades as a nurse allowed her to see right through their deception. While sitting in church praying, Margaret had come to a conclusion. If things kept going like this, something that couldn't be undone was going to occur. Her long career in nursing had taught her this. That same, unending feeling of dread that had overwhelmed her when her husband died had her in its grip again. And this sense of foreboding was soon going to be proven accurate. One day, with Rachel's delivery still 2 weeks away, her son telephoned. His voice sounded distant and empty on the phone, like it was traveling a long way to reach her. Mom, Emily's gone. At that precise instant, everything in Margaret's life just froze. Outside, the Ohio winter wind blew ominously. The 2 days after she learned of Emily's death felt like a horrible dream. Her son and daughter-in-law were speeding through the funeral arrangements at an odd pace. They announced only close family members would be at the service. The stated cause of death was complete organ failure stemming from a serious infection, and the casket was to be kept closed. The body's too badly damaged to be viewed, Mom, Margaret argued, drawing on her 30 years of nursing knowledge. If it was organ failure caused by an infection, there absolutely has to be a report filed with the health department. What's the report number? Who was the doctor on duty? A pause hung in the air. Her son's expression became strained. Everything's already taken care of. Mom, please don't get worked up over details that don't matter. That night, Margaret had a dream. My husband, Thomas, showed up, urging me to keep Emily safe. When I opened my eyes, drenched in perspiration, the full moon was shining a spooky light through the kitchen window. Rachel went into labor unexpectedly the day before the funeral. It was 2 weeks earlier than we'd figured. "Mom, could you take care of everything for the funeral? We have to rush to the hospital." After my son and his wife left for the hospital in an ambulance, I was left alone with the funeral director. It seemed like he wanted to tell me something. "Actually, Mrs. Wilson," he said. He glanced around nervously before continuing. He spoke in a hushed tone. "There are some odd noises coming from the coffin." My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. Noises? What sort of noises? Like someone moving in there. At that point, I could positively hear a quiet sound coming from the coffin. The funeral director left, looking really pale. I went closer. I approached the coffin, my hands shaking. In all my 30 years working as an emergency room nurse, I'd seen a lot of dead bodies. But I'd never experienced something so terrifying. Then I heard it. "Help me, please help." It was a quiet but clearly recognizable voice. It was Emily's voice. When my hand touched the coffin, I felt a small vibration from inside. As I cautiously began to open the lid, I heard the sound of cloth tape being pulled off from the inside. And then, Grandma. Emily was tied up with chains, with cloth tape covering her mouth. It had come loose a little from tears and sweat, allowing her voice to come out, although her body seemed so weak. I felt incredibly disoriented, a side effect of the sleeping pills, but at least I knew Emily was still with us. "My name is Margaret," and I reassured her, "Everything's going to be okay, honey." I moved quickly to remove the restraints on my granddaughter. My years of working in the emergency room had taught me how to stay efficient in times of crisis. Emily's body felt chilled and her heartbeat was faint, but there was no doubt she was living. "Are you in pain? Do you feel unwell?" I asked, my nursing training automatically taking over as I began to assess her. I saw injection marks on Emily's arms. It was obvious she'd been given sleeping medication. "Mama made me take medicine," she whispered. "Papa tied me up." Emily's broken phrases revealed how serious the situation was. I realized this must be insurance fraud. My son and daughter-in-law had a massive $6 million debt, Emily's life insurance policy, and the fact that they were expecting a baby boy. Everything made perfect sense now. Then unexpectedly my cell phone rang. It was the hospital calling. "Mom, come quick, Rachel's in labor." My son's voice was filled with terror. I made a quick choice right then and there. "Okay," I told him, "I'm on my way." I set Emily gently in my car after I hung up. But instead of going to the hospital where my son and his wife were, I turned my car toward the emergency room at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. It was the same hospital where I used to work for 3 decades, where I had a network of people I could rely on. "Dr. Johnson, can you please check her out and call the police?" I urged. My old friend, the pediatrician, understood the problem as soon as he looked at the child. A treatment team was put together right away, and Emily's safety became the primary focus. Suddenly, another phone began to ring. It was her son calling. I decided not to pick it up. At this instant, my sole focus had to be on saving this person's life. The winter sunrise in Ohio, which I could see outside the window, brought with it a glimmer of optimism. In the emergency room at Riverside Methodist Hospital, the doctors were busy caring for Emily. They found lots of sleeping pills in her, and she had marks on her wrists and ankles from being tied up. The tests kept coming back, displayed on the monitor. Malnourishment, dehydration, and a slightly low body temperature, all pointing to abuse. In this hospital, where I had spent 3 decades working, I was now dealing with the most significant challenge of my career. The sterile white walls and the familiar smell of disinfectant, things I once took for granted, now felt incredibly charged with anxiety. Her vital signs are getting better. The level of sedatives in her blood is still high. Her body temperature is slowly increasing. I heard the medical staff's voices exchanging information rapidly. Every single update made it clear that Emily's life was still hanging in the balance. "Mrs. Wilson, the police have arrived." A young nurse came over to me. Her expression showed both empathy for me, her former coworker, and worry about how bad things were. "Emily is out of immediate danger." Though Dr. Johnson stopped speaking. We'd been close friends and worked together for 2 decades. "This is, without a doubt, attempted murder. The amount of sedative she took was almost enough to kill her. On top of that, it's clear there's been ongoing abuse during recent months, indicated by the marks of being held down on her limbs, a gradual decline in nutrition, and visible bruises all over her. These injuries definitely weren't accidental. The medical documents appeared on the screen. Emily's body weight had fallen to just 70% of what's considered healthy within the last 60 days. This was intentional starving. Also, the drugs that were found near the injection spots. It all indicated that this was a planned crime. Then all of a sudden there was a bunch of noise in the hall. The sound of those emergency vehicle sirens and feet moving quickly. "Mom, why did you take Emily away?" James rushed into the room, his expression twisted with emotion. Rachel, right behind him, was writhing from the strain of labor. Her hospital gown was completely wet from sweat. "Why? Are you seriously asking me why?" Margaret's voice was unbelievably cold. The professional control she had developed over her 30 years of nursing experience was helping her stay calm. $6 million in the hole. Emily's life insurance policy, worth $3 million, and also the arrival of your son you'd wanted for so long. Was this how everything was planned? Did you really try to kill your own daughter by burying her alive? My son's complexion turned white as a ghost. Rachel let out a scream. It was difficult to tell if she was screaming because of the pain of the birth or because she was feeling guilty. "No, that's not. We didn't." At that very moment, police officers entered the room. The distinct noise of their heavy boots filled the quiet hospital room. "James Wilson and Rachel Wilson, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of a child, child abuse, and an attempt to commit insurance fraud." Rachel just started yelling in a crazy, hysterical way. "We didn't have any other option, honestly. The debt from the fertility treatments, the fraud from the investments, it was all just destroying us. If only the baby wasn't here, we could have a fresh start." The sound of her cries filled the hospital room. Right then, she was hit with severe contractions. "Bring the patient in. Get the delivery room ready." The medical staff reacted quickly. "Rachel, go to the delivery room." James was taken away by the police. His posture no longer displayed any sign of the once confident real estate agent, but now appeared to be that of a crook. That evening, during questioning, the truth came out. $4 million spent on 7 years of fertility treatments. $2 million lost due to investment scams. The desperate pair intended to use Emily's life insurance policy to clear their financial obligations. Knowing their next child would be a boy was the final push for them to go through with their plan. They plotted to sacrifice their cherished daughter's life as their route to a new beginning. "We started to reduce her food intake 2 months ago." To simulate an illness, James stated plainly during the interrogation. His voice now sounded completely devoid of feeling. "Rachel got some sleeping pills from someone she knew from her time working at the hospital. We carefully plotted everything out so that Emily's grandmother, who was a nurse, wouldn't suspect anything. We told the funeral home that the damage was caused by a bad infection and made sure the coffin was sealed." Each admission made Margaret feel incredibly sad. In Emily's hospital room, Margaret held her sleeping granddaughter's hand. The steady beeping of the machines proved that she was alive. The silent drip of 4 different fluids, the steady line on the heart monitor. All of this confirmed that her beloved granddaughter was truly living. And right next door, Rachel was giving birth to a baby boy while being watched by the police. A new life entering the world and a family falling apart. Contrasting destinies met inside those plain white hospital rooms. Cops carrying official permission to be there moved silently down the halls. I was looking out the window. Soon, it would be daylight. My 3 decades of nursing experience had kept someone alive, and a mother's gut feeling had kept a family from breaking completely. However, this wasn't the final act. It was the starting point of another fight. I had no idea what kind of light was waiting on the other side of all this darkness. Only Emily's gentle touch gave me definite assurance. 3 months after everything happened, on a beautiful spring morning, tulips were popping up in my garden from the bulbs I'd put in the ground over the winter. Emily was intently putting little plants into a small flower bed tucked away in a corner of the yard. "Grandma, is this all right?" Her voice sounded like it was getting healthier little by little. Following the incident, thanks to Child Services acting quickly, I had been given custody of Emily. I was also given the responsibility of caring for her newborn brother. "Yes, that's just fine." Next to Emily, 3-month-old Thomas was sleeping soundly in his stroller. He was my grandson, named after my late husband. This was what our new family looked like. As more information about the incident came out, the local community became very supportive. The church community promised to help fully in raising both children. "Mrs. Wilson, do you need anything?" Neighbors consistently checked in on us. My former coworkers, who were still working in the ER, would come by to give me a hand during their breaks. In the meantime, the legal proceedings for my son and daughter-in-law carried on. They were looking at really long prison terms for things like faking insurance claims, mistreating a child, and trying to kill someone. The wickedness of their plot was especially shocking to everyone when all the particulars started to surface. The plan was to weaken her over 60 days and fabricate the need for serious medical treatment. After that, they were going to give her something to make her go to sleep, and then put her in a coffin while she was still alive. Even now, I still shake when I recall what the prosecutor said in court. This whole awful thing was very carefully thought out so that a mother with some medical knowledge would not be able to figure it out. Even so, there was one chink in their scheme. My granddaughter Emily's amazing desire to keep living. Because she cried and sweated so much, the tape around her mouth slowly started to come loose. And as the drug that made her sleepy wore off, I could hear a little voice. I don't even like to think about what would have happened if I hadn't heard that sound. Grandma, do we have to go to the doctor again? I had to get her weekly therapy. The experts are telling me that Emily will need long-term care for all the trauma she went through. Some nights she had nightmares, other times she'd have sudden, overwhelming feelings of fear. But very slowly there were things that started to show that she was getting better. Because of what happened, I started getting involved in preventing child abuse. I now do presentations for doctors and nurses at Riverside Methodist Hospital. I've got 3 decades of experience being a nurse, plus the experience of rescuing my own grandchild. When I speak, people really listen, and I know my words touch them. You know, when it comes to bad things that happen, it's never just someone else's problem. When she opens her mouth, people always want to work alongside her. The system set up to catch and stop abuse early kept growing constantly. Those flowers that were placed in the garden radiate in the pleasant sun of springtime. I watch Emily, seeing her brother asleep, and I can't help but smile gently. I told Thomas, when you're older, let's plant some flowers together. That statement filled Margaret with joy. It's true, their family had broken down. However, here was new beginnings and promise. Let's go, everyone, it's time for lunch. The wonderful smell of the apple pie we only have on Sundays drifts throughout the whole house. The springtime wind whispers outside, and the tulips in the garden gleam in the light. It felt as though a new era was starting.